Hello everyone and welcome back to Flashback Fridays, and this week I'm going to pick up where I left off last week and look at another Jabba the Hutt figure, but this time from Hasbro and from the episode 1 line. Now I don't think that Jabba needs any introduction, so I'll get straight into this one. As we saw last week, this is a deluxe action figure set. You essentially get 2 action figures in this oblong packaging, and if we look at this packaging we can see that there is this window display where you can see the actual figure that came with this, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Apologies, the interior inlay has been removed from my packaging, and overall my packaging has definitely suffered a little bit in storage across the years. It's a little bit battered, but nevertheless hopefully this will give you a good impression of what it looks like. By now I'm sure you're all very familiar with the Star Wars branding that we got in the 90s and the early 2000s, first with Kenner, and then of course Hasbro adopted and adapted this for their episode 1 line. We have the Star Wars logo front and centre, we have this headshot of Darth Maul in the background, whilst in the foreground we have the lightsaber blade igniting. Then in the centre of the packaging we have a photo of the action figure itself, and this is slightly unusual because this is side profile and it's really highlighting or showing off the action feature of this figure, which is Jabba essentially spitting. If we flip the packaging over, I think the first thing that's really striking is just how much small print there is on this packaging, and in multiple languages no less. But in the top right hand corner we actually have some images. Again, we see photo images of this figure and the accessories that come with it, and showing off his various action features. All in all, I can't say that this packaging is the most attractive in the world. I don't think it's the most presentable. It doesn't look that fantastic when it's on display. It just feels very functional, and it just seems to be swamped with small print, both front and back. It just seems to be very text heavy. So it looks absolutely fine, but it's just not the most attractive. If we compared that to the packaging last week, I would argue that this pales in comparison. Okay, so let's take a look at this Jabba figure. Now the first thing I want to comment on is actually the texture and the materials they've used for this figure, because his central body is actually made of a rubber material, which gives this a nice texture. It's very unusual, it's quite different for this line, and it does contribute to the idea of him feeling a bit more alien, a bit more slug-like. And likewise, I think the sculpting and the paint apps for the most part are actually really good, and I think they've caught the likeness of a younger Jabba the Hutt pretty well. I mean, this definitely resembles what we see on screen. If anything, he might look a little bit more slimmed down than perhaps he appears on screen. I don't know, it's hard to judge really, but I think this is pretty effective. I think they've done a very nice job of getting the colorization just right, and I think it looks really effective. I think there's a number of different shades going on here. It's not just two-tone, there's actually a number of different washes running through it to give it that texture, which is really nice, that extra detail. And I do like how the gradient works, so it just gradually phases from one colour to another very subtly. It's not stark, it's not very clearly defined where one colour ends and the next one begins. So I think this looks really good. I think this works really effectively for the most part. Now, one of the criticisms I would have around the paint apps would be around the eyes. They've simply used a yellow paint for the base of the eyeball, and then what looks like marker pen to actually draw in the detail of the eyes themselves, which is a little bit disappointing, especially if we compare this against the figure last week where we saw Jabba's eyes were really well done, very carefully thought out. It's actually a separate piece, a separate plastic translucent piece inside the head, which was really effective and looked quite lifelike for a toy in this scale. So I thought they'd done a really good job of that, and this is very disappointing and very basic by comparison. The other major issue I have, and let's address the elephants in the room, is the sculpting when it comes to the mouth. You can see there is this rather large gaping hole in the centre of his mouth. This isn't very attractive, this is pretty freaky looking, and it definitely distracts from what is otherwise a pretty nice sculpt of this character. The other aspect to this, and it's directly linked, is the fact that he's holding this sort of squid amphibian thing in his left hand, and this is moulded in, this cannot be removed, so whether you like it or not, he's always going to be holding this thing, and it definitely compromises the overall look and aesthetic of this toy, no matter what you do with it really. Okay, so let's look at the articulation. He has one swivel at each shoulder, so he can lift his arms up and down. And then he has one final swivel at his waist there, so he can move from side to side. And in terms of accessories, he comes with this plastic gong, which of course is directly linked to the action feature, because you can remove the top of this amphibian's head, you can slide this into a spring-loaded slot in the centre of the mouth, and then push his right arm down. This triggers the release of the mechanism and outfires what is essentially a missile. Now, that's pretty fun for all of about 30 seconds. You'll soon get tired of that. So I think Hasbro thought ahead and realised they could get 2 bites of the cherry with this feature, because his body is a soft pump that essentially collects water and allows you to spray water out of it and create this spitting effect when you press down on his body. Now, the set does include another figure. This is actually the compare from the pod race. It's kind of unusual. It's definitely a more alien character and probably not one that would have been very successful single carded, which is why I think they've probably bungled him into this particular release. But this is still quite cool. This is unique. This is the only time this character was released to the best of my knowledge in this scale. And in terms of articulation, he has a swivel at each top of the head, which is great. He has a swivel at the shoulder for all of his arms, which is pretty cool, and there's an extra swivel when it comes to the top of his leg there and his tail as well. And there you have it. So probably not the most exciting set in the world, but kind of fun in its own toyetic way. I think the addition of this extra pod racing compare character, sorry I can't remember his name, I think that's a nice addition for anyone who likes to world build, and as a kid I liked having lots of different aliens, so I didn't mind having this character in this set. This just was an added bonus, the icing on the cake I suppose. It wasn't something I was particularly excited about, but it was nice to have. The Jabba is actually a pretty nice figure all in all. But obviously there is a compromise that's been made by Hasbro in their attempt to try and make this figure functional and fun and have action features, and thinking a little bit outside the box when it came to this. They've had to compromise on the overall aesthetic. Now, that aesthetic definitely bothers the adult collector in me. It bothered the child collector in me a little bit as well, to be honest. I never liked having that big hole in the centre of his head. But that being said, I still think it's actually a fun idea, and it definitely distinguishes him from the previous Jabba release. If we put those two figures side by side, you can see that roughly they are scalable. They look pretty similar in terms of their scale. Two very different approaches to this character, both successful in different ways. I think overall, as an adult collector, I definitely would lean much more towards the Kenner version. I just think it looks a lot better on display, and it's not as noticeably compromised in terms of its overall look. But that said, as a kid, it was probably a lot less fun than the Episode 1 version. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.